I've always seen myself and Daniel as partners in everything, sharing dreams that lit up our hearts late into the night. We'd spend hours curled up on the couch, laughing about baby names and the nursery colors we'd choose, warm pastels and soft lighting, a place brimming with hope. I felt his excitement mirror mine, and I carried that closeness like a soft secret in my chest. There was something so sweet about those quiet moments, when our hands brushed against paint samples and we pictured tiny socks waiting in drawers. I believed that no matter what came our way, we would face it together. Our love felt like an anchor, solid, unwavering, the very definition of family. Even as the months passed and the tests came back empty, I clung to that vision. Every negative result felt like a pebble in my shoe, but I kept walking, certain that hope would outlast disappointment. Daniel would kiss my forehead and say, "We're in this together," and I'd believe it with all my heart. The thought of us holding our baby someday kept me going, no matter how far away it seemed. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and just watch him sleep, my breath catching in my throat at how deeply I loved him. I wanted so badly to make that dream real, to give us both the family we'd always pictured, but deep down, a small voice always whispered that nothing in life is guaranteed, that even the most carefully tended dreams can slip through your fingers like sand. I pushed that voice away, burying it under layers of faith and determination. After all, Daniel and I had promised to face every challenge hand in hand. And in those quiet moments, with our hearts wrapped around each other's, I couldn't imagine it any other way. When we finally decided to see a fertility specialist, my nerves danced like restless shadows in my chest. I wanted so badly to be hopeful, to trust that everything would work out just the way we'd always imagined. Daniel squeezed my hand on the drive over, his smile gentle, a silent promise that no matter what the doctor said, we'd still be us, a team. The sterile smell of the clinic and the hushed voices of nurses reminded me how much was riding on this visit, but I kept my head high. After all, we'd already made it this far together. The waiting room felt like it was holding its breath, and I tried to stay calm, even as my mind raced with what-ifs. I thought about the nursery we'd talked about, the rocking chair in the corner, the soft glow of a nightlight, the way Daniel's laughter would fill the room as he read bedtime stories. I held those images close, a shield against the fear that threatened to unravel me. Daniel leaned in close, brushing a loose hair from my face, and whispered, "We've got this." I let myself believe him, even if only for a moment, because in that instant, it was enough. His touch was a lifeline, a reminder that whatever happened, I wouldn't face it alone. We'd built a future out of late-night talks and whispered promises, and I still believed in every one of them. My heart beat steady and slow, tethered to the hope that had carried us this far. And even as the nurse called my name, I felt like I was stepping into the next chapter of our story, ready to face whatever waited on the other side. I remember sitting in that sterile white room, my hands clasped so tightly they ached, listening to the doctor's calm, measured voice. My mind kept wandering, slipping into daydreams of tiny hands gripping mine, soft giggles echoing down the hallway. I didn't want to let go of that picture, even as reality knocked quietly at the door. Daniel sat beside me, his arm a steady weight across my shoulders, and I leaned into him, trying to believe in our future. The doctor's words sounded distant, like an echo bouncing off the walls of my hope. When the appointment ended, I walked out with a fragile kind of courage. I kept repeating to myself, "We're in this together," like a prayer I didn't want to lose. My heart felt lighter in those moments, as if love alone could rewrite the story we'd been handed. Daniel didn't say much on the ride home, but he kept glancing at me, his fingers tracing circles on the back of my hand. I didn't need words, just the warmth of his presence and the soft promise in his touch. But deep inside, I knew there was a storm coming, and no amount of whispered vows could keep it away. I pushed that thought down, determined to hold on to the dream a little longer. Because in that fragile hope, in the quiet of our car rides and the comfort of his hand in mine, I felt like we were still on the same page. And for that brief moment, I let myself believe that love could conquer the uncertainties we didn't dare to name. The day the doctor called, I thought my heart would burst from my chest. I answered on the third ring, my fingers trembling, bracing myself for news I already feared. His voice was calm, almost too gentle, like he knew he was about to drop a weight I could never lift alone. When he said the word, infertile, It felt like the air vanished from the room. I stood there frozen, the phone pressed to my ear, every dream I'd ever painted in those nursery walls shattering in an instant. I wanted to scream, to tell him he was wrong, that there had to be another way. But all that came out was a small, strangled, okay, like my voice had been buried under the rubble of that single word. My fingers clutched the edge of the counter, and for a moment, I felt so small, so breakable. The doctor kept talking, offering comfort I couldn't hear, because all I could think about was the future that would never come. My chest was hollow, and I swear I could feel the echo of every heartbeat in the emptiness. When I hung up, I turned to Daniel, expecting him to pull me close, to tell me it didn't matter, that we were enough as we were. But as I looked at his face, I saw something crack in his eyes, and that's when I realized that this wasn't just about me. It was about us. And in that silence, in that breathless pause, I felt the first tremor of a world that was already starting to fall apart. I waited for his embrace, for the soft words of comfort that would tell me we were still in this together. But Daniel didn't say a word. Instead, he stepped back, his shoulders stiff, his jaw set in a hard line I'd never seen before. His eyes, those warm, laughing eyes, had turned cold, like I was a stranger standing in our kitchen. My mouth was dry and my heart pounded in my ears, but I still held on to the hope that he would see me, really see me, and tell me I wasn't alone in this. He didn't. His voice was sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. "How can you be so useless?" He spat, and each word felt like a stone hurled at my chest. I blinked, trying to understand, to catch my breath as the weight of his disgust settled around me. He didn't look away, didn't soften. He just stood there, watching me break apart with the same cold indifference he'd offer a stranger. My tears blurred my vision, but I could still see the hard set of his mouth, the finality in his eyes. In that moment, everything shifted. All those late-night talks, those whispered dreams, they crumbled like paper in the rain. I realized that the man who had once promised me forever saw only failure in the woman who couldn't give him what he wanted. And as he turned away, his footsteps echoing down the hall, I felt something inside me crack open, a quiet, hollow ache that I knew would take time to fill. I sat there in the silence that swallowed the house after the slam of the door, the sound still ringing in my ears like a cruel echo. Tears fell freely now, blurring the future I thought we shared, dissolving the nursery we'd planned into dust. My hands trembled as I reached for the phone, not to call anyone, just to steady myself against the weight of everything that had just been ripped away. The emptiness around me felt colder than any winter night, and for the first time, I was truly alone in a place I thought was home. The quiet was deafening, a stark contrast to the laughter and whispered promises that had filled these rooms just days before. I could almost hear the ghost of our dreams, faint and fragile, slipping through my fingers like smoke. My heart ached not just from loss, but from the sharp sting of betrayal, from realizing the man I loved had turned away when I needed him most. In that moment, I wasn't just broken. I was invisible, discarded, a shadow of the woman I thought I was. But even in the depths of that silence, a small part of me whispered that this wasn't the end. That the pieces might one day come back together. Not in the way I imagined, but in a way that was entirely my own. And so I sat there, tears blurring the lines between past and future, holding on to a fragile thread of hope that whispered, "This is just the beginning." In the days that followed, I felt shattered, like my heart had been crushed under a weight I couldn't lift. Every morning I woke up hoping it was all a bad dream, only to remember the cold truth waiting in the daylight. I questioned everything about myself, wondering if I was broken beyond repair, if my worth was tied only to something I couldn't give. The silence in the house felt louder than ever, filled with the absence of the future I thought was ours. But underneath the pain, something else was stirring. A quiet fire, hard to name but impossible to ignore. I started seeing a therapist, someone who helped me untangle the mess of emotions that had taken root. Talking through the grief and confusion, I began to understand that my value wasn't measured by my ability to bear children or by the cruel words that had been thrown at me. Friends reached out, their voices a lifeline, reminding me I wasn't invisible, that I was so much more than I had believed. Slowly, I started to reconnect with parts of myself I'd forgotten. The dreams I'd set aside, the strength buried beneath the hurt. That anger began to rise, sharp and clear, pushing through the fog of sorrow. It wasn't just anger at Daniel, it was anger at the injustice, the cruelty, and the way my life had been turned upside down. But with that anger came resolve. I decided I wouldn't let someone else's rejection define me. I would find my own way, build my own future, and reclaim the woman I was beneath the pain. It was the first step on a long road, but it was mine. Some days were harder than others, when the silence pressed in and memories stabbed like cold needles. But I learned to lean into those moments, to let myself feel every tear, every ache, without shame. It was messy and painful, but it was real. I found comfort in little things: a morning coffee with a friend, the warmth of sunlight on my skin, the pages of a book that took me away, if only for a while. Each small moment became a stitch in the fragile quilt of my healing. Therapy sessions were my refuge, a place where I could unravel the tangled emotions without fear of judgment. I started to understand the patterns, the lies I'd told myself to survive, and the truths I needed to face. Slowly, I peeled back the layers of self-doubt, replacing them with something stronger: self-love, self-respect, and the quiet certainty that I deserved better. It wasn't a sudden transformation, but a steady climb, step by step, fueled by the fierce determination not to be defined by loss. Reaching out to old friends, reconnecting with the people who truly cared, reminded me that I was never truly alone. Their kindness was like sunlight breaking through clouds, warming the cold spaces inside me. I began to rebuild the parts of my life I'd neglected, rediscovering passions and joys I'd pushed aside for too long. It was a slow process, but with every day that passed, I felt myself coming back to life, stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever came next. One evening, as I sat alone in my quiet apartment, I realized something powerful was shifting inside me. The pain hadn't disappeared, it probably never would, but the fear that once held me captive was loosening its grip. I was beginning to see myself through a different lens, no longer as the woman Daniel had dismissed, but as someone capable of so much more. That night, I made a promise to myself. I would no longer let anyone's rejection define my worth or dictate my future. I began to dream again, not about a life tied to someone else's expectations, but about what truly made me feel alive. I dusted off old hobbies, signed up for classes I'd postponed, and opened myself to new possibilities. Every step felt like reclaiming a piece of my soul that had been hidden away for far too long. I was learning that strength wasn't about never breaking. It was about finding the courage to stand back up when you do. It wasn't an easy journey, and there were days when the weight of it all threatened to drag me back down. But with every breath, every choice, I was building a foundation that was mine alone. A foundation built on resilience, self-respect, and the fierce determination to live a life defined not by loss, but by what I could create from the ashes. Starting over wasn't as dramatic as I imagined. It wasn't a sudden explosion or a grand declaration. It was quiet, almost imperceptible. I began focusing on my career again, diving into work I had set aside while chasing dreams that felt just out of reach. The office became a refuge, a place where I could rebuild not just my days, but my sense of purpose. It was in those small victories, a completed project, a compliment from a colleague, that I found sparks of confidence flickering back to life. I also dusted off old hobbies, the ones that once brought me joy, but had slipped away under the weight of everything else. Painting, reading, long walks in the park, simple things that helped me reconnect with myself. I learned to cherish my own company, to find peace in solitude without feeling lonely. The apartment I moved into was mine alone, a blank canvas waiting for me to fill with new memories, new dreams. It was small but full of promise. Daniel reached out a few times, his messages a confusing mix of bragging about a new love and testing if I was still vulnerable. I read them once, maybe twice, before deciding silence was the strongest reply I could give. I was no longer the woman waiting by the phone, hoping for a crumb of affection. The nursery was empty, yes, but so was my life with him. And for the first time, that emptiness felt like freedom. Moving into my own place was a quiet revolution. No more shared spaces filled with memories that hurt, no more reminders of a future that never came to be. It was just me, and that was enough. I took my time unpacking, choosing each item carefully, turning the apartment into a sanctuary. The walls started to feel less like blank canvases and more like invitations to create something new. Every morning, as sunlight spilled through the window, I felt a little more anchored, a little more myself. Reconnecting with friends became a lifeline. They didn't ask me to fix myself or pretend I was okay. They just showed up, bringing laughter and companionship that reminded me what genuine love looked like. I found solace in their presence, in the late-night calls and spontaneous coffee dates. Those moments stitched together the frayed edges of my heart, reminding me that even when life breaks you, it can also build you back stronger. Daniel's attempts to reach me grew less frequent, but I noticed how his silence echoed louder than his words ever did. It was like he was trying to reclaim a part of my life that no longer existed. And in that realization, I found peace. The nursery might have been empty, but I was filling my life with something far more important: myself. I remember the first night I slept alone in that apartment. The silence was almost deafening, but it felt good too. No arguments, no cold shoulders, just the steady rhythm of my own breathing. For the first time in a long while, I felt safe in my own skin. I started to dream again, but this time, the dreams were mine alone, not tied to anyone else's hopes or disappointments. I painted the walls a soft, warm color, something to remind me every day that this was my space, my life, my story to write. Daniel tried once more to reach out, this time with a mix of apology and something that felt like regret. But I didn't respond. Not because I was bitter, but because I knew my worth had nothing to do with his approval or presence. I was learning to stand on my own 2 feet, to find strength in my own voice, and that was a power no one could take away. The nursery was still empty, but so was the space he once filled in my heart. And that emptiness was no longer something to fear. This quiet rebuilding wasn't about erasing the past. It was about honoring it while moving forward. Each step I took was a declaration that I was still here, still fighting, and still whole. And with every dawn, I felt more ready to face what the future held, whatever that might be. As I stepped into this new chapter of my life, I realized that family meant so much more than biology. The idea of adoption, of opening my heart to a child who needed love, started to feel less like a backup plan and more like a calling. I thought about all the ways to nurture and create a family, through friendship, mentorship, and community. It was a shift in perspective that felt both terrifying and freeing. I was no longer defined by what I couldn't do, but by the limitless ways I could love and be loved in return. I began volunteering at local centers, meeting people whose stories were raw and real, filled with struggles and triumphs that made my own journey feel connected to something bigger. Those connections, unexpected and profound, sparked a new kind of hope. It wasn't about replacing what I lost, but about building something new, a family of choice, stitched together by shared love and mutual respect. Every smile, every hug, every moment of trust felt like a thread weaving me into a tapestry far richer than I'd imagined. This awakening gave me strength I never knew I had. It wasn't easy to let go of the old dreams, but in doing so, I found freedom. I discovered that my power wasn't tied to motherhood or to the approval of others, but to my ability to rise after being discarded. And with that realization, I knew I was unstoppable. I started to see my life through new eyes, not as a story of loss, but as one of resilience and reinvention. The pain of the past was still there, like a shadow that reminded me where I'd been, but it no longer defined me. I reached out to others who had faced their own storms, finding strength in shared experiences and the quiet understanding that we were not alone. Those connections became a source of comfort and inspiration, fueling my determination to build a life that honored my truth. Exploring adoption and mentoring opened doors I hadn't known existed. Meeting children and families who welcomed me with open arms reminded me that love isn't limited by biology or circumstance. It's a choice, a commitment, a force that can heal and transform. I began to embrace the idea that family is something you create, not just something you're born into. And in that, I found a deep sense of purpose that was both humbling and empowering. Every step I took in this new direction was a reclaiming of myself, a way to turn pain into possibility. The woman who had been called useless was no longer waiting for validation. I was writing my own story now, filled with hope, courage, and a love that came from knowing my own worth. Looking back now, I see that moment as a turning point, the day I stopped letting someone else's words dictate my value. When he called me useless, I could have let it break me. Instead, I chose to build from the ashes. I became unstoppable, not because I proved him wrong, but because I proved myself right. My worth was never tied to a single role or relationship. It was rooted in my strength to rise, again and again. I found joy in unexpected places, in friendships that felt like family, in quiet mornings spent chasing new dreams, and in the simple act of loving myself fiercely. The future I once feared now feels wide open, full of possibility and promise. I know there will be challenges ahead, but I'm ready to meet them head on, with a heart that's been tempered by fire and a spirit that refuses to be dimmed. This is my story, a testament to resilience, to rediscovery, and to the unstoppable power of a woman who refused to be defined by her pain. And as I look toward the horizon, I do so with hope, knowing that the best is still yet to come.